On my desk, I have got a pile of books. These are three of the most important books, perhaps the most three important books, in the history of the world. First of all, I have the Iliad of Homer. Secondly, I have the Odyssey of Homer. Thirdly, I have the Bible, which arguably is not one book at all, but 73 books put in one volume. So that makes 75 books. I would say if you're a Protestant, you would only count 66 books, but there are 7 books, or parts of books, 7 books that are recognised as part of Scripture by Catholics, but not by Protestants. There's no need to go into what those are just now. Why do I pick these 3 books? I've picked the Iliad and the Odyssey because I consider that that they are at the very foundation of our civilization. They're far more important than the Epic of Gilgamesh or anything like that. The Iliad stands at the very beginning of Western civilization. It is brilliant text, and it can only have been written by a genius. It cannot have been written by a committee. The same is true of the Odyssey, and so much of our culture derives from Greece at the very outset that it would be wrong to neglect these texts for any educated person. I could have included, and I haven't because I don't have a copy of it, Virgil's Aeneid, which was really meant to be a sort of Latin Odyssey, which had the protagonist not of Odysseus, but of Aeneas. And the reason I haven't included that in my pile of books is simply because I don't actually own a copy of it. But we could say we have Greece and we have Rome at the very outset of our civilization, and European civilization, Western civilization, derives from Greece and Rome, and those two, East and West, if you like, being welded together, put together, and making a culture. I think that the study of Greece and Rome, the study of the Greek and Latin languages, is something which is actually very important, and that this is why the classical education of studying these languages held sway in the West for such a long time, and why if you look up any list of influential people from the last 1,000, 2,000, I'm tempted to say 3,000 years, you will find that it's very likely that they all studied either Greek or Latin, or possibly in some cases both. We derive them from Greece and Rome. I would add the other book, which is of course the Bible. This book is the most important book in the world. It's not really one book, it's a collection of books. But if we take Greece and we take Rome, I don't have something to represent Rome. We take Greece, we take Rome, and we take the Judeo-Christian heritage that we find in Scripture, which is transmitted to us through the Church, then we have the very foundations of these things are really the foundations of Western culture and Western civilization. Greek is a very rich language. There's a very beautiful treasury of lyric poetry in Greek, second only perhaps to the treasury of lyric poetry which we have in English. Now, I don't know if people realise this, but actually it is a case could easily be argued that we actually, people who speak English, have the most rich body of lyric poetry in the world. There is a book, and I cannot see it at hand anywhere, but it is in the house, called Palgrave's Golden Treasury of Songs and Lyrics, which is one of the great treasures of this world, actually, I think. and I heartily recommend that. But that's not on the same. I can't really compare that to the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and the Bible. That would seem wrong. So the classics, the Roman classics, were preserved during the Middle Ages through the monasteries, the Benedictine monasteries, the monks who laboriously copied out all these texts. They did this for posterity, so that people would be able to read these texts. And it was also in the Middle Ages that the manuscripts, the texts by, for example, Aristotle, the great philosopher, were discovered, I believe, in Arabic originally, and then they were translated from Arabic into Latin. It was some time before the Greek texts were discovered. That wasn't until later, at the Renaissance, which was a great flowering of scholarship, which happened at a critical time in Western history, immediately before the religious breakup of Western Christendom, which is called, rather unfortunately, the Reformation. So we have, basically, to sum up, 3 sources, or we could say 4 sources, of Western culture. We have Greek, represented by Homer, Aristotle, Plato, and a great deal of other authors. That's our first source. Secondly, we have classical Latin. We have people like Cicero, Seneca, Sallust, Pliny, Petronius, various authors who wrote in Latin. The ancient Greeks, to go back to the Greeks for a moment, the ancient Greeks they were very intellectual people, I suppose, in their own way, and lots of modern science, if you read the ancient Greeks, you can see it anticipated in some of the theories of the ancient Greeks, like, for example, even the notion of heliocentrism, the sun being at the center of things, and not specifically necessarily the solar system. Heliocentrism originally meant, I think, that the sun was at the center of the universe, which I don't think anybody actually would actually posit now. That derives from that was long before Copernicus, in a Greek philosopher. We have Greek, we have Latin, as I said, so they're the two springs, as it were, but also we have the Hebrew influence of ancient Judaism, which is a massively strong influence on Western culture, and we have, of course, the revelation of the New Testament, which is, well, sublime. And there was a wonderful phrase that I saw in yesterday's episode of Game of Thrones, that I heard in yesterday's episode of Game of Thrones, which I want to include in this broadcast before I finish. It was the maesters, who were kind of a combination of a doctor and a monk. They preserve the manuscripts, as the Benedictines did in the Middle Ages. They heal people. They're this sort of tribe, a special class of people set apart, which one could almost compare to a priesthood. They said, one of them said, "We are not like the people north of the Twins. We are not like the people south of the Twins. We are the memory of the world," which is something that could be applied easily to the Benedictine preservation of the ancient classics in the Middle Ages. But also, if we study these texts that have been so vitally important over the last 3,000 years, we shall preserve the memory of the world. And if we do not read these texts, if we allow them to just fall away into oblivion, then we are forgetting the memory of the world, and in doing that, we forget who we are.